Honourable members, the prayer. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our Queen and to our government, to members of the Legislative Assembly, and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideas, but laying aside all private interest and prejudice, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. Honourable members, I ask that you please remain standing as we pay tribute to 3 former members of this Assembly who passed since the last time we met. James Henderson served 3 terms in the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. In his first 2 terms, from 1963 to 71, he was the Social Credit Member for Leduc. During his time, he was the Minister of Health, the Minister of Environment, and elected the 3rd time, Mr. Henderson was the Social Credit Member for Wetaskiwin Leduc, 1971 to 75. He served as the official opposition whip in 1972, and then leader of the official opposition and House leader in 73. In the fall of 1973, Mr. Henderson became an independent member. Mr. Henderson graduated with a Bachelor of Science of the University of Alberta in 1948, then worked as a petroleum engineer. His public service began as a municipal politician where he served as the Mayor of Devon. His tenure of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta, he remained active in politics as he was a candidate in the 1988 federal election, Mayor of Devon from 89 to 92, and a candidate for the Devon Town Council in 2001. James Henderson passed away on June 29, 2020 at the age of 93. L. Barry Pasha served 2 terms as the Alberta New Democrat Party member for Calgary Forest Lawn from 1986 to 1993. Mr. Pasha was a graduate of the University of Calgary, where he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics in 1962 and a Master of Arts in Sociology in 1971. Mr. Pasha taught mathematics, sociology, and political science at Mount Royal College, a self-described political activist. He was a candidate in 4 federal elections and 2 provincial elections prior to being elected to serve the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. His activism and commitment to democracy continued after his tenure. From 2000 to 2001, he was the leader of the Equity Party. Barry Pasha passed away on February 3rd, 2021 at the age of 83. The Honourable Elaine Mccoy served 2 terms as the Progressive Conservative member for Calgary West from 1986 to 1993. She was the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs from 86 to 89, the Minister of Labour from 89 to 92. Ms. McCoy obtained a Bachelor of Arts and a law degree from the University of Alberta. She worked as Senior Legal Counsel for TransAlta Utilities Corporation and was appointed Queen's Counsel in 1988. In 2005, Ms. McCoy was appointed to the Senate, one of the first senators to embark on a web-based initiatives. Mrs. McCoy believed that engaging with people on social media, describing how, quote, it benefits citizens by giving them hope that they too can affect change, can be heard and participate in the progress of our country, end quote. Ms. McCoy was an advocate for Senate modernization and an ardent representative for Albertans. Elaine McCoy passed away on December 29, 2020 at the age of 74. In a moment of silent prayer, I ask that each of you remember the way that you may have known Mr. Henderson, Ms. Pashuk, and Ms. McCoy. Rest eternal, grant unto them, O Lord, and let your light perpetual shine upon them. Amen. Honourable members, please remain standing and join. Don't join. Due to COVID-19 public health restrictions, the singing of our national anthem by Brooklyn Allard. It will be followed immediately by God Save the Queen. Honourable members, please be seated. Thank you, Brooklyn. The Government House Leader is rising on some procedural matters.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do rise to move Government Motion 62, which is on the order paper in my name. Be it resolved that despite Standing Order 13.7, 16, and 13.4b for the duration of the 2021 spring sitting of the second session of the 30th Legislature, and to allow for appropriate physical distancing within the chamber during that time, all members may sit, speak, and vote in any seat that has not been assigned to them, provided that they immediately relinquish that seat on the request of the member who has been assigned that seat or the Speaker.
Members, I appreciate the motion on behalf of the Honourable Government House Leader. In order for him to move it at this time, this will require unanimous consent, so perhaps you might just ask for unanimous consent?
Correct, Mr. Speaker. Out of practice, I will move first that I can get unanimous consent in order to revert briefly to government bills and orders.
Excellent. Having heard the motion for unanimous consent, I will ask only one question. Is there anyone opposed to providing consent? If so, indicate now. Unanimous consent is granted. Honourable members, having heard the motion, Government Motion 62, a correction, this is a debatable motion. Is there anyone wanting to join in the debate? Seeing none, Honourable members, having heard the motion, Government Motion 62, as proposed by the Honourable Government House Leader, all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. My opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried, and so ordered. The clerk.
Introduction of visitors, introduction of guests, ministerial statements, member statements.
Well, honourable members, welcome back to the daily routine. I look forward to this session together. I'm sure there's going to be an incredible amount of good quality debate and very little codswallop. The honourable member for St. Albert has a statement to make.
Yeah. Sorry about that. It took over 9 months for this government to start the process of distributing funding designed to top up wages for essential frontline workers. Almost 1 year into dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, and these workers are still risking their health and safety and the health and safety of their families. Yet the critical worker benefit launched by this government actually leaves out more essential workers than it includes. Let me give you an example. The Skills Society is the Capital Region's biggest nonprofit disability support provider. They serve over 375 people with disabilities, many with complex needs who are extremely vulnerable. They are one of a few programs in Alberta supporting Albertans with developmental disabilities who live in the inner city and face multiple barriers and increased risk. They have over 500 essential workers doing this work across the city. Since the pandemic started, they've had over 70 cases of COVID, hospitalizations, staffing shortages, and unprecedented pressures. Every single one of them remained dedicated to their work, knowing they were essential for stewarding this community through the pandemic. Yet despite promising disability support workers would be included in this benefit program, this government told them after the fact that many of their staff would not qualify because they don't work overnight. That is wrong. The fact is, this government is drawing a line in the sand between who is critical and who is not, months after deeming them essential. These workers face the increased risk posed by the pandemic every day, and they rose to the challenge to help fellow Albertans. And their reward is another broken promise. This government had 9 months to design a proper program to support these workers, and they still got it wrong. Applications are still open. Minister, I urge you to take a good, hard look in the mirror and make the right decision to change the ridiculous eligibility requirements of this benefit. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cardston-Siksika has a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Alberta's government made significant efforts to support and protect Albertans' lives and livelihoods. When COVID cases rose in the fall of last year, our government implemented stronger health guidelines designed to lower overall cases, reduce hospitalizations, and protect Albertans. As Alberta continues to bend the curve, it is critical that we continue to follow a measured approach that aims to work with Albertans, not against them. Our four-step path forward provides a clear set of goals for Albertans to see. This plan takes away the confusion that is evident in other provinces' plans for easing restrictions. While other provinces have been quick to shut down businesses, churches, and recreation activities with little or no indication of when they will reopen, our plan clearly communicates the opposite. However, communication is not enough right now. That is why we launched the Small and Medium Enterprise Relaunch Grant, providing up to $20,000 to Alberta businesses ordered to close or alter operations. With the conclusion of this program in March, we will continue supporting businesses by providing $30,000 to those hardest hit by the pandemic, with an additional $10,000 for those with a revenue loss of over 60%. Grants like this are crucial for Alberta businesses to offset costs and also provide funds used to implement measures to minimize virus transmission and protect their local communities. Additionally, despite delays by the federal government on vaccine procurement, Alberta continues to lead the vaccine rollout and vaccinating our healthcare workers and our most vulnerable. As of February 23rd, we have administered over 186,000 doses of the vaccine, with over 77,000 Albertans receiving their second dose. In order to fully protect Albertans, the huge success of our provincial vaccine rollout is a testament that a positive future is on the horizon. Our government remains committed to protecting our healthcare system and supporting Alberta businesses. Thank you to all Albertans for helping to protect lives and livelihoods across the province.
The Honourable Member for Lac St. Anne Parkland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I prepared a member statement in the fall last year, and unfortunately we didn't get a chance to get it out through to timing. But I'd like to share with the House here a couple words about some Alberta aviators that passed away last fall in September. So Ken Fowler and Hanley Elder were two experienced pilots, and they were good people that will really be missed. I had a chance to talk with them at length 2 weeks prior to their accident about all the interesting things taking place out in Rocky Mountain House at the airport there. You see, they were out at Villeneuve Airport, and they were part of a local crew that ended up flying over top of the Ledge building in Edmonton to pay tribute to the RCF pilots who served our country when we needed them the most. Hanley was originally from Germany and chose to live here in Alberta. It's where she continued her career in policing and reached her dream of flying. Her RV-6 was a local favorite at a lot of the aerobatic competitions. Ken and I spoke about the Rocky Mountain Airport and how it was an incubator for aerobatics in the country and how they were training some very high-quality pilots. We spoke at some of his own designs. He had a speed glider that he had been working on and a jet-powered aircraft. There were the two at the top of the list. It's with a heavy heart that I received a text 2 weeks later about an accident. To quote a post from Team Rocket, whom Ken was a co-founder, we're heartbroken to share the news that beloved Team Rocket pilot Ken Fowler passed away on Saturday, September 26th, as a result of an aircraft accident near Edmonton, Alberta. Ken was a loving husband, devoted father, grandfather, talented pilot, and friend to all. He was a passionate aviator who spent his life sharing his knowledge and encouraging others. Ken co-founded Team Rocket Aerobatics, one of the most sought-after air show routines in North America. He was a longtime member of the International Council of Air Shows, dedicated AC evaluator and enthusiast mentor to many. On October 2nd, pilots across the province flew into Rocky Mountain House to say goodbye, and I was able to pay my respects there as I was amongst that aviation community. To the funeral was posted on Facebook where folks could make their statements, be part of it, where they touched their lives. Rocky Mountain House. Yeah.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On December the 8th, 2 Muslim women were attacked at Southgate Mall. On December 15th, another woman wearing a hijab was assaulted at a train station. On December 16th, a black man was assaulted in central Edmonton in what police called a hate-motivated attack. On February 3rd, 2 more Muslim women were attacked. Last Wednesday, another black Muslim woman was stalked and harassed. And Saturday, protesters carrying torches invoking the memory of Charlottesville paraded in front of this very building. It is unconscionable that anyone could look at these incidents and dismiss them. However, that is exactly what this Premier has done. It took him days to condemn the white supremacists set on terrorizing people in this city. Even when he did, he made excuses for some in the crowd. That is shameful and unbecoming of the office he holds, Mr. Speaker. As a critic for multiculturalism, I know it's my responsibility to ensure that Albertans, particularly those from racialized communities feel welcomed and safe in Alberta. I'm here today to fulfill that responsibility and to ensure that this chamber understands the fear, confusion, and hopelessness that so many in the communities I represent feel. I'm here today to ensure that this chamber understands the abandonment racialized Albertans feel from their government. We are at a critical moment in the history of this province, but the challenges we face are not insurmountable. If we are going to overcome these issues, we must first acknowledge that they exist. Then we must be unrelenting in our fight against racism. We are elected by people to serve people, and the people in our communities need our help. So it is up to us, it's our duty and our responsibility. I hope the Premier will finally agree with me and the members of Alberta NDPs and step up. Albertans are looking for actual leadership.
The Honourable Member for Spruce Grove Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in recognition of Pink Shirt Day, celebrated on February 24th, which is an international day to recognize and stand against bullying. Today, I wear pink to send a message that I will stand against bullying in our respective communities across Alberta. We know that bullying can happen to anyone, at any time, regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation. 14 years ago, 2 teens from Nova Scotia saw one of their classmates being bullied for wearing a pink shirt to school. They took a stand and started a legacy of action. They bought dozens of pink shirts and handed them out to students and teachers at their high school to wear in the same day. This was a simple, yet powerful statement that bullying would not be tolerated in their school, that we must welcome, include, and respect others, no matter who they are or what they wear. I'd like to thank the Minister of Community and Social Services, as well as the Minister of Education and the Minister of Children's Services for keeping this legacy alive here in Alberta. To show everyone in our communities, whether in school or at home, online or at work, that bullying has no place in our lives. I would also like to thank the teachers in my riding of Spruce Grove and Stony Plain and across Alberta for the work they do every day to prevent and stop bullying in our communities. I'm proudly wearing pink today, and I'm happy to see many of my colleagues here doing the same. We hope that everyone will join us and take a stand against bullying. And not just for today, but throughout the year, and especially with the increased isolation from the pandemic. Help is available through the Bullying Helpline, an anonymous tool available 24/7 and in more than 170 languages. Anyone dealing with bullying can dial 1-888-456-2323 to find out how to get help in their area, or chat online at alberta.ca/bullying chat. Together we can work to end bullying and make our communities a safer place for everyone. Thank you.
Honourable members, the time is 1:50, and that makes it oral question period. And the Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. If there's one word this government fails to understand, it's humility. For weeks, the Premier and the Health Minister boasted about their vaccine response. We're ready to roll, the Premier told Albertans. We're ready to inoculate more than 1 million people a month. Then, when they finally rolled out a website to allow Albertans to sign up for appointments, it crashed because it wasn't prepared for the demand. Premier, this is one of the most important public health efforts in our lifetime. Will you apologize to those Albertans who spent hours trying to book vaccinations only to be foiled by the incompetence of your Minister of Health?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, first of all, let me welcome all members back to the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the work ahead of us on behalf of Albertans. We were all very disappointed with the technical problems with the centralized online booking for seniors over the age of 75 for the vaccine yesterday. Fortunately, those problems were resolved through the course of the day. We received over 1.5 million phone calls in the space of the first hour or two. But now over 100,000 seniors have been booked on that system, in addition to 22,000 seniors in congregate care, in addition to tens of thousands through the pharmacies that will be delivering the vaccine through the program.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm indeed happy to hear that those thousands of Albertans were able to sign up, but thousands more spent hours waiting for them to fix this broken website. Many simply gave up. It was so bad, one Albertan took it upon himself to rewrite the code of the website. And when asked about that, the minister had to ask a reporter to send him the tweet so he could look at that solution. Premier, how can you trust the competence of a health minister who has to outsource his tech fixes to Twitter? He lost the trust of healthcare workers long ago. And now all Albertans are being subjected to his incompetence. Isn't it time for a competent Minister of Health?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, this is a remarkably competent Minister of Health who has led us through this challenging pandemic with, thankfully, one of the lowest per capita rates of death in the Western world, in the developed world, for a large population jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, the Minister was very clear with his officials that their budget was no consideration. They had an unlimited budget to prepare for this centralized booking. He also asked that they stress test for the anticipated 130,000 on the first day. Unfortunately, that did not happen. I spoke very bluntly to officials about this today to ensure that never happens again.
The Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, this Premier and that Health Minister are responsible for the pressure that was created when they dragged their feet all last fall in taking actions to curb the rise of cases in the second wave. They created the pressure that overwhelmed the healthcare system, and they failed yet again, as they did on contact tracing, to prepare for this website after spending weeks bragging about their vaccination capabilities and attacking the federal government. Albertans deserve real leadership, Mr. Speaker, that takes responsibility for those actions, doesn't put it off on other officials. When will we see that from this Premier and this Minister?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, Albertans have seen that from day one of the pandemic, when this province was the best prepared in Canada with respect to personal protective equipment, so much so that we could share surplus material with other provinces. This province has consistently, over the past year, had the highest per capita levels of testing in the country over the course of the past year. This was the first province with an online assessment tool. We've had the fastest pace of vaccination, Mr. Speaker, through much of the past several weeks. We now have over 2,000 contact tracers and the ability to investigate over 1,400 cases a day, Mr. Speaker. That's leadership.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre for his second set of questions.
I suppose it's expected, Mr. Speaker, that on Budget Day, the Premier is going to rewrite so much of history, or attempt to. But the fact is, all of us owe a debt of gratitude to Alberta's public health officials, doctors, and frontline staff. They've guided us through this pandemic, done their utmost to save lives, and they deserve gratitude. What they don't deserve is having their hard work undermined and disrespected by folks like the members for Airdrie East and Cypress Medicine Hat, who have publicly campaigned against the health care measures they support. The Minister of Health, will you clearly state that you reject these dangerous conspiracy theories, and if so, tell us what you will do to stop your colleagues from spreading them?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, from the beginning, Alberta has taken a balanced approach to protect both lives and livelihoods. Unlike the NDP, who's had only one goal throughout this pandemic, which is to politicize it, to attack people, to create fear, to create panic, Mr. Speaker. It has been grotesque to follow the most irresponsible opposition in Canada that has never missed an opportunity to spread fear, panic, hysteria. Mr. Speaker, if they were in office, the schools would be closed right now. We would be in a hard lockdown, Mr. Speaker, and Albertans, we would not have the balanced approach that we do today.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the hysteria is coming from the words of this Premier, and indeed, the politicization, the creating fear has come from those members who have spread untruths like masks spread COVID, students wash their hands too much, our COVID-19 tests are 50% inaccurate, and on the eve of the second wave, quote, the worst is behind us. None of this was true, but no action was taken to stop that constant spread of inaccuracies by UCP MLAs. Is the Premier and the Minister unaware that these ludicrous, factless claims undermine our public health effort and put lives at risk? Will they stop their MLAs from spreading these dangerous conspiracy theories?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I disagree with a number of Albertans who believe that we should have no public health measures, or very few. I think we do need targeted measures and use them as a last and limited resort to prevent or control viral spread, to protect our healthcare system and save lives and prevent preventable deaths. And Mr. Speaker, within that range, it's called a democracy. There's a legitimate space for democratic debate within that space. Obviously, for some of the people that were in front of the legislature the other day perpetuating conspiracy theories that all of this, that COVID isn't real and it's been invented, I reject those views completely. But those are not the views of anyone in my caucus, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member.
Mr. Mr. Speaker, some of those people out there were inspired by this Premier because the issue starts at the top. This Premier told this very House that COVID is just like influenza, that young people aren't affected by it, that vulnerable Albertans with no housing may be magically immune. His comments were cited by folks at that march, including that one right here in my constituency where people carried torches in an attempt to intimidate others. He's been quoted by Grace Life Church in their flouting of the public health orders. So to this Premier, will he apologize for his claims and acknowledge his leadership is so weak he's now actively helping fuel misinformation and provide cover
The Premier has the call.
Mr. Speaker, what a perfect and almost humorous encapsulation of the absurdity of the NDP position on COVID-19. The protesters to whom he refers were out there attacking me and this government, referring to me as Hitler, as a dictator, as a fascist, for having brought in this government's reasonable public health measures. Mr. Speaker, I in particular and this government in general were the targets of the venom of those who were promoting conspiracy theories and sadly some who were promoting hatred which we unqualifiedly condemn.
The honourable member for Calgary Buffalo has a question.
Stay home, save lives. This message was repeated over and over during the holidays, Mr. Speaker, even while 6 UCP MLAs were jetting off to the beach. The Premier, who spent weeks lecturing Albertans that they should stay home, gave a free pass to his caucus, his cabinet, and his own chief of staff to holiday in Hawaii, Vegas, Mexico, London, and Arizona. Premier, Albertans were offended by this selfishness of your caucus and your refusal to take action. Will you unequivocally apologize and take full responsibility for this scandal? You are their boss, after all.
The Honourable the Premier.
Already did that, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Calgary Buffalo.
It took 5 days for this Premier to take action, but not because it was the right thing to do, rather because of the extreme public pressure. Even then, the Premier's so-called punishments involved giving his MLAs less work and giving his chief of staff a $50,000 severance check. Can the Premier explain why Albertans have had to sacrifice so much to follow the rules but have to fight his government for help at every turn, while his jet-setting MLAs barely get a slap on the wrist? Is this what he calls responsibility? Albertans call it a joke, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the day after I became aware that some members had traveled, I took responsibility for having been insufficiently clear about our expectations. And Mr. Speaker, action was taken. I don't know how people losing their jobs constitutes a promotion. And with respect to severance for people who have been removed from their positions, it's a legal obligation that the NDP honored with respect to their staff as well, Mr. Speaker.
For Calgary Buffalo.
The Premier really saw nothing wrong with the Minister of Emergency Management jetting off to Hawaii because she didn't really want to miss her family's annual Christmas tradition. I have news for the Premier. Hundreds of thousands and thousands of Albertans missed their family's annual Christmas traditions this year. Does the Premier see no connection between his minister choosing Hawaii over doing her job during a pandemic and the failure of his government to manage this public health crisis? I'll give him a hint. It's his lack of leadership.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, apparently the member opposite missed the fact that there were serious and wide-ranging consequences for that conduct.
The Honourable member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, in May of 2020, the federal government announced a program to help provinces provide wage top-ups to essential frontline workers. It was meant as a thank you to the hundreds of thousands of Albertans who've risked their lives when the pandemic hit. That includes everyone from nurses and healthcare aides to correctional officers to the workers at meatpacking plants, all of whom face the risk and danger of workplace outbreaks. Yet this government left that money on the table for 287 days. These workers deserved better. Premier, how can you possibly justify waiting nearly a year to give these workers the thanks they were due?
The Honourable the Premier has the call.
Well, Mr. Speaker, once again, premise of a question completely false. The delay was not nearly a year. We consulted broadly to find the best way to administer the critical worker benefit with some 350,000 Albertans, frontline workers in both the private and public sector, receiving $1,200 payments at a cost of nearly $500 million with an enormous contribution from Alberta taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, we know one thing though, if the NDP was in charge, that money only would have gone to NDP government union members. Private sector workers on the front lines benefited from this program as well, and we fought for it.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Millwoods.
287 days. The minister already had to put nonprofit workers back in after initially telling them they weren't included. I'm glad to see this government clarify, but my colleagues and I have received thousands of messages from workers who were told by this government to keep working at the start of the pandemic. They were told they were essential, but now that there's money involved, they're told they're not critical enough. Premier, why do you continue to disrespect Alberta workers by disqualifying them from this important benefit?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will remind the NDP that one of their affiliate government unions delayed for months the wage top-up to healthcare aides in long-term care settings. Mr. Speaker, using their workers as pawns in a power game. For the NDP, it's always about politics and never about people, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, not a single labour group or worker was consulted prior to the rollout of the critical worker benefit. In fact, the minister has had to clarify and backtrack multiple times since it's rolled out. Employers are required to apply on behalf of their workers, but there are more hoops to jump through than a three-ring circus. Frankly, this program is a mess. This money should have been a good story, but so far it's only causing stress and pain. So I ask the Premier, how do you expect Albertans to trust you and your government when it's clear they are the last priority on your list?
The Honourable, the Minister of Labour and Immigration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to clarify, we worked with a number of ministries in rolling out this benefit. And the comments made by the member's office saying that nonprofit sector was not included is simply incorrect. Mr. Speaker, as the members opposite know, nonprofits deliver many of the services for children's services, community and social services, and they were included from the outset of this. Mr. Speaker, Woods Homes, Ben Calf Rope Society, Family Connections, Kids Cottages, Hall Services, these are just to name a few of the not-for-profits that were included in the original intention. The only difference is that the delivery mechanism was through the line departments. Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Spruce Grove, Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parents across Alberta have been through significant stress over the past year. Even with the uncertainty of the pandemic and the economic downturn, many parents continued working, providing essential services and fueling our economy. Childcare is an integral part for these working parents, and yesterday's announcement on the working parents benefit is welcome news. Can the Minister of Children's Services please explain how the working parents benefit will help parents across Alberta get back to work and kickstart our economy?
The Honourable, the Minister of Children's Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The pandemic and the economic downturn has created significant stress and uncertainty for working parents and families. As the member said, as many of them have continued to fuel our economy and provide essential services over the past year. Fewer families have been using childcare over the last number of months, and we then have a certain amount of dollars, $108 million, in unspent funding for childcare. We decided to put those dollars directly back into the pockets of hardworking Alberta parents. This $560 benefit per child will be very helpful for these families, and for those already accessing subsidy, this benefit will almost completely cover the cost of 1 month or more.
The Honourable Member for Spruce Grove, Stony Plain.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer. Given that my riding of Spruce Grove Stony Plain is one of the youngest populations within the province, and given that many lower to middle income working families residing in my riding require childcare for their children, can the same minister please explain to this House who will be able to apply for this benefit and why certain eligibility considerations were made?
Minister of Children's Services has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Families with a household income of up to $100,000 and who have paid $561 or more and accessed at least 3 months of childcare or preschool between April and December of last year will be eligible to apply. Mr. Speaker, this benefit is income tested, so we can continue to ensure families most in need are receiving these supports and funding. We've also extended the eligibility requirements to families accessing all types of licensed and unlicensed childcare, as as well as preschool, because this government has always and will continue to support parent choice.
The honourable member.
Thank you, Minister. Given that this benefit will help nearly 100,000 Albertan families and approximately 192,000 children will be eligible to receive it, and given that this money is going directly to parents at a time when many are working hard to get back into the workforce, can the Minister please explain to this House why this benefit is going directly to parents and not to childcare providers as was done previously?
The honourable minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Childcare is absolutely an important part of Alberta's economic recovery. That is why, together, the provincial and federal governments have invested over $110 million to directly support the needs of childcare operators right across this province over the last number of months. We also made sure that early childhood educators were eligible for the critical worker benefit, recognizing the important work that they have done over the past year. But, Mr. Speaker, with these unspent dollars, the one group that we really wanted to support was those hard-working Alberta parents, and that's why we've invested these dollars right back into their pockets.
Honourable member for Edmonton Whitemud has risen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Children's Services finally announced how she'll be spending the unused dollars in her childcare budget. While I'm glad that this money will no longer be sitting inactive in a bank account somewhere, working parents in Alberta are actually terribly disappointed with how it's being used. Instead of investing it in quality, affordable, and accessible childcare for all Albertans, it's being spent on a one-time payment to some families that will cover just 2 weeks of childcare. 2 weeks, Mr. Speaker. Minister, how do you expect Alberta parents to afford childcare next month, when you don't have a budget to sell? Don't you believe Alberta families deserve affordable childcare every month?
The Honourable Minister of Children's Services.
Mr. Speaker, this one-time working parent benefit goes to support parents at a time when they have been facing unprecedented stress and chaos, both because of the pandemic, but also because of economic uncertainty. The members opposite called for us to reinvest these dollars, which were intended to be invested to support childcare subsidies for hardworking Alberta parents, and we are doing exactly that, investing these dollars back into parents who need the help the most right now.
Honourable member for Edmonton Whitemud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that universal, quality, affordable childcare is the necessary infrastructure to get families back to work, and given that investing in childcare is the single most effective thing we can do to jumpstart our economy now and promote long-term job growth in the future, and given that getting Albertans back to work should be the #1 priority of this government, Minister, do you actually believe that any parent will now be able to go back to work or school because you've given them 2 weeks' worth of childcare? Why is your government using this money in such an embarrassingly ineffective way?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we continue to be focused on childcare because we have said it is an important part of Alberta's economic recovery. Absolutely, this is one-time funding, but we will continue to support working parents and childcare operators right across this province. But, Mr. Speaker, the one most important thing we can do to protect lives and livelihoods of Albertans is to keep our economy open, to work towards a safe restart, which is not, Mr. Speaker, what the members opposite would like to do. They would like to keep our economy shut down, and that is the #1 barrier to Alberta parents getting back to work.
The honourable member.
Well, given that under the NDP's $25 per day childcare program, low-income parents paid $0 per day, and now that the minister has ended that program, they're paying at least $13 per day, and given that all other families in the $25 per day program will see their childcare fees double or triple in April, forcing many of them to leave their jobs because they simply can't afford childcare anymore, and given that thousands of working parents don't even qualify for this working parents benefit despite spending over 30% of their monthly income on childcare, Minister, how is it possible your government has so misunderstood the needs of working families and the economic need to get Albertans back to work?
The Minister of Children's Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I would point out that in the former government's own pilot program, feedback was that people felt that it was unfair. It picked winners and losers. It didn't measure income, need, employment, or need for post-secondary training. Mr. Speaker, we continue to invest in the highest subsidies and wage top-ups for early childhood educators in the entire country. We are going to continue to support Alberta working parents and through very targeted investments at a time where we have to balance both these important investments and fiscal restraint and responsibility.
The honourable member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UCP government's energy strategy has failed. Last March, the Premier made a risky bet that Donald Trump would win the White House, and he lost. The Premier bet up to $7.5 billion on Keystone XL despite significant legal and political risk. And on his very first day in office, President Biden stopped the project in its tracks. Can the minister tell us exactly how much money has been lost on this risky bet to date and how much is at risk? Please be specific.
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the final number with respect to liability is pending ongoing discussions with the operator TC Energy. But the only reason that the NDP is raising this question is because they've always opposed this pipeline. Their leader campaigned against it. They sent MPs down to Washington actively to lobby against it. Just like the member who posed that question attended rallies to oppose Northern Gateway when she was working for green organizations. Mr. Speaker, this government was elected to do everything possible to get pipelines built and to undo the NDP's anti-pipeline record.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Given, Mr. Speaker, that we supported the project with barrels of oil rather than betting Albertans' money, and given that the UCP failed energy strategy was also built around a public inquiry, an inquiry that has been delayed 3 times and is at least $1 million over budget, and given that the inquiry has been caught peddling climate change denying conspiracy theories, which only harms our international reputation and scares away investment, resulting in job losses, not gains. Can the minister tell us exactly how many jobs the inquiry has created? Is it just one for a major UCP donor?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you for the question. Mr. Speaker, we did extend the time commitment for the public inquiry by 4 months for them to complete the report, and that was so that they could complete it fairly and do due process, give an opportunity for those companies and those organizations who are named in it to have a chance to respond. But, Mr. Speaker, the reason why we're doing the public inquiry is to defend our oil and gas sector, that the NDP government did not do when they were in office. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the work that we are doing to defend our sector.
The order, the Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View has the call.
Given that the UCP's War Room is also part of the failed energy strategy, and the War Room has been an embarrassment after plagiarizing multiple logos and impersonating and attacking journalists, and given that the UCP failed inquiry is outdone only by its disastrous War Room, and given that both of these failed creations have actually served to further harm our international reputation and scare away investors, will the minister admit that they've wasted billions of dollars of Albertans' money on their failed energy strategy with nothing to show for it? And will she board up the War Room and cancel the inquiry?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The members opposite would not understand what defending the oil and gas industry is, because, Mr. Speaker, they sat in government for 4 years, and during that 4 years, we saw Northern Gateway vetoed, we saw Energy East canceled, we saw divestment and project after project terminated, and, Mr. Speaker, during that time, I don't recall them ever standing up once and denouncing the lies and myths and the damage that was being done to our industry. Mr. Speaker, never once did they defend our industry, and we always will.
The Honourable Member for Vermilion Lloydminster Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The carbon offset program has been used to compensate participants for their contributions to reducing net emissions since 2012. The crops of farmers can form a carbon sink, which helps offset CO2 in our atmosphere. The result is some extra money in the pockets of our farmers for this sequestration. To the Minister of Environment and Parks, could you explain how this program has aided agricultural industry in recent years?
The Minister of Environment and Parks has the call.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member for the question. Since 2012, the Carbon Offsets for Farmers program has been supporting the emission-reducing potential of our agriculture sector. The program was one of several initiatives in our province that have reduced emissions, all while creating jobs in key Alberta sectors, including agriculture. There is incredible innovation and work taking place in this province that is benefiting our key sectors, all the while creating jobs and protecting the environment in our province.
Member for Vermilion Lloydminster Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the Minister for the answer. Given that some of our farmers have come to rely on this extra source of income from the carbon offset program, and given that this funding has been very useful to help agricultural producers pay for some of their operational expenses in recent years, And given that a memo went out in late 2020 indicating the program would wrap up in 2021, to the same minister, can you explain why the program will no longer be available this year?
Honourable Minister of Environment Parks.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Alberta farmers are receiving emission offsets through the Conservation Cropping Protocol and have known since 2012, the year that the program was launched, Mr. Speaker, that it would end in 2021. In fact, the end of the program, the year, is actually written into the program when it was introduced. Alberta Environment Parks recognizes that some farmers are still actively using the program to generate emission offsets and have sent out a memo to advise them of the changing situation, as well as to have discussions with them about other programs that are available that I suspect I'll have an opportunity to talk about in just a second.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again to the minister. Given that if this program were to disappear, the cost of the farmers would be high, and given that with other forms of federal taxation, such as the carbon tax on the rise, our farmers are stretched financially as it is. And given that our farmers want some sort of compensation for how they are helping reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere, to the same minister, are there any programs being considered to replace carbon offset program? And if so, can the minister elaborate on them?
The Honourable Minister of Environment Parks.
Mr. Speaker, they're not only being considered, there are other programs already in place. Other offset protocols are available to farmers in our great province, including the selection for low residual feed intake in beef cattle, the agriculture nitrous oxide emission reductions to manage fertilizer usage on farm fields, biogas production and combustion where biodigesters are used to produce energy from waste products, microgeneration for installation of micro wind turbines and solar panels, and energy efficiency for reduced electricity usage in buildings. I'm proud of the work that all Albertans, including farmers and other industries, are doing to help protect our environment, Mr. Speaker, inside our province.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar is next.
On February 8th, the Minister of Energy finally, after months and months of Albertans asking her to reconsider her approach on coal mining in the Eastern Slopes, pressed pause and promised consultations. Unfortunately, Albertans still don't know any details about how the government plans to consult Albertans. The only thing they do know is that the minister is hoping for more coal development. Can the minister now promise Albertans that the outcomes of the consultation will be open and are not predetermined to bring more coal mining to Alberta's Eastern Slopes?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member knows, we did reinstate the coal policy on February 8th. Mr. Speaker, we reinstated it after hearing the voices of many, many Albertans who were concerned that some protections along the Category 2 lands on the Eastern Slopes would be lost with surface mining for coal. Mr. Speaker, that's why we reinstated the coal policy, and not only did we reinstate the coal policy, but we put in place 2 directives to the AER to reinforce that. Directives that there'd be no further exploration and directives that there would be no mountaintop mining on Category 2.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that many Albertans will be disappointed that the minister failed to answer my first question, and given that while the Minister of Energy has promised to pause changes to the coal policy until after consultation, but given that work to advance coal developments is still ongoing as several projects are still under exploration, and the Minister of Environment and Parks is working to make more water from the Old Man Rivershed available for coal mining, and given that Albertans want this government to engage in good faith, can the ministers promise us today that they will immediately halt any coal activity and stop the damage that's happening in our Eastern Slopes?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Member knows and is well aware that we are not changing water allocations. But Mr. Speaker, what we are doing consultations with Albertans to hear their views on what they would like to see in a modern coal policy. Mr. Speaker, I announced that we would be starting those consultations on March 29th. Mr. Speaker, I've asked the department to prepare an engagement strategy, to have terms of reference, scope of review. Mr. Speaker, this is going to be a very extensive consultation project to hear from Albertans. It will be conducted by Albertans for Albertans. And Mr. Speaker, it will be designed to protect our mountains, mountains that Albertans have told us they cherish very much.
The Honourable Member.
Given that before the government finally admitted its mistake, the Premier told Albertans that the coal policy was a dead letter and that there was nothing to worry about, and given that Albertans disagreed because they knew that removing the coal policy opened up the Eastern Slopes for more coal mining, And given only coal mining companies were consulted ahead of time, and for months the government listened to them alone and told everyday Albertans they were seeing ghosts. To the Minister, how can Albertans possibly trust you on the coal file when you cut them out of talks, publicly stated false information, and auctioned off some of our most beautiful natural areas to the highest bidder?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member opposite knows, we've fully reinstated the coal policy, including the restrictions on Category 2 lands in the eastern slopes. And Mr. Speaker, I think that the member opposite would appreciate it because it was their government who said on May 24th, 2016, in a letter to the AER, that the Category 2 designation does not preclude surface coal mine development. Mr. Speaker, when I read the coal policy, it says it does, that it is restricted. Mr. Speaker, I would ask the member opposite to explain what they meant when they removed that restriction.
Order, order, order. Might be the first day, and maybe I'm a little grumpier than I need to be, but I was on my feet for an extended period of time. Edmonton Beverly Clearview has the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Small businesses are paying the price for the continued games being played by this UCP government. Owners are doing everything they can to keep their doors open and their staff employed. And for the Premier to announce a half-finished program which won't be available for months and lacked any substantive details is insulting. Annie Dormuth from CFIB stated, quote, "Additional support through the enhanced COVID-19 business benefit will come too late to give Alberta businesses a fighting chance of survival," end quote. To the Minister of Jobs and the Economy, doesn't your government realize many businesses may close their doors for good before they even see a dime?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation has actually spent a great deal of time talking to and understanding small business. And I can assure the honourable member that the welfare of those small businesses is a very top priority for that minister and our entire government. And I can assure the honourable member that we are considering what is best for those small businesses and during this tough time. And we acknowledge that while we can't make the tough times go away, we are trying to make it better.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clearview.
Not fast enough. Given that the minister is claiming this new program will help the hardest hit businesses that have fallen between the cracks of the previous provincial and federal supports, and given that among the businesses hardest hit are music venues, hotels, and fitness studios, but now the minister is capping how much these businesses receive in support after shortchanging new businesses. Forget cracks. Your programs have left gaping holes for small businesses. Isn't now the time to actually step up and lend them a hand? If you're out of ideas, I've got a bunch from Alberta businesses at albertasfuture.ca you're welcome to look at.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Municipal Affairs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, speaking of gaps, if the honourable member thinks it's difficult to try to help out the businesses that are not fully open now during the current restrictions, can any of us imagine how tough it would be under the NDP if almost everything was closed down? They constantly campaigned during this whole time of COVID to close more things down, to shut more business, to take more people's jobs away, to drive investment out of Alberta. Mr. Speaker, we are actually trying to keep people in business, trying to help those businesses stay open and try to keep people in their jobs, unlike what the NDP has been asking for.
The Honourable Member.
Your government's failing. Badly. Given that the minister, with one stroke of his pen, could put a cap on delivery fees and provide Alberta restaurants immediate relief, and given that when asked about implementing a cap, the minister said he's happy to allow large international companies like Uber Eats and Skip the Dishes to gouge the very small businesses the minister claims to support. And given that a 30% commission is threatening the very existence of our small businesses, Minister, do you stand with our local Alberta small businesses or with these international companies threatening their very existence?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, with the NDP, it's always a zero-sum game. If they want to help somebody, they want to put somebody else out of business. They want to take away the jobs from those people delivering food. The Premier actually took a more balanced approach and asked some of the delivery places to lower their fees where they could, and some of them are working with that. But, Mr. Speaker, the fact is, we have allowed those businesses to be open as much as we can. We will continue encouraging the delivery people to be reasonable, and businesses still have the ability to deliver it themselves or band together and get another delivery service. But, Mr. Speaker, the point is, we want all businesses to survive, well, unlike the NDP that wants to pick winners and losers.
The Honourable Member for Leduc-Beaumont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether it's a teenager hoping to get on the road for the first time or someone working towards a career in commercial transportation, driving plays an important role in lives of everyday Albertans. When the NDP decided to nationalize road tests, we witnessed massive backlogs and delays that were months long, and we all know the economic recovery includes people also being able to get their licenses. Minister, could you elaborate on the changes you announced and how they will help alleviate this problem?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we've recounted this a few times, but a couple weeks before the last election, the former NDP government unceremoniously nationalized all the driver examiners and went from about over 150 driver examiners down to 77 and created an untenable backlog, which we've been fighting with ever since. So, Mr. Speaker, we've taken measures to hire up. We've got up to over 200 driver examiners, and we actually have more to say, which I hope I'll get a chance to in the next question.
The Honourable Member for Leduc-Beaumont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our road testing system should be simple to use, easily accessible, and offer timely access to tests for people who need one. Given that Albertans have had to deal with backlogs and delays for the past several years, and given that many have been unable to access a test entirely, Minister, what impact have these changes had since they were implemented, and how will they affect the lives of Albertans?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here's some good news. From the driver examiners for 4, 5, and 6 that were government employees, about 95% have actually caught on with the privatized system and are working with register agents right now. And we've gone from, in my office, from people sending me letters every day about not being able to get a test for weeks, months, years, not even be able to book a test. As of last week, I know there was an excess of 20,000 tests available between then and the end of March. It may not be perfect yet, Mr. Speaker, but it's way better than the mess the NDP left us.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the previous government created bottlenecks in the road test system for so long that many Albertans thought the issue would never be resolved, they claimed they were doing it to make sure that road tests were conducted more fairly. And given that road tests are once again offered in the private system, how is the Alberta government making sure that these tests are conducted fairly and with accountability, and how can Albertans trust the road test system?
Well, Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, when the NDP blew up the system and nationalized it, they actually ruined the ability for the driver examiners that were left to do a good job for Albertans. About the only thing that we agreed with them on, and they were right about this, there were some problems with the system, but rather than fix the problems, they blew up the whole system and put people at an inability to get their tests for a couple of years. So now, Mr. Speaker, all driver examiners have a government-issued GPS-enabled tablet which keeps track of when they start, when they stop, and provides some consistency and some oversight. And we have more inspections, Mr. Speaker. Again, it's not perfect, but it is way better than what the NDP left.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Students graduating in Alberta have amongst the highest debt levels in the country. They're facing increased costs due to the rise in interest rates imposed by this UCP government, and some are facing overall tuition hikes of more than 20%. I wrote to the Minister of Advanced Education to ask him to consider the effects of the budget cuts to post-secondary in a time when we need to give Albertans further access to training and an incentive to stay in the province. Minister, will you commit to Albertans that you will stop the cuts to post-secondary immediately before it's too late?
The Honourable Minister of Children's Services is rising.
Mr. Speaker, we know that supporting our post-secondary institutions right across Alberta is important. We also know that the McKinnon report clearly stated that we do invest more in post-secondary institutions than other comparable provinces. Tuition is, in fact, the main way students invest in their education at Alberta post-secondary institutions, and this provides significant value for their money right here in Alberta. A post-secondary education greatly improves social and economic outcomes, and we're working on increasing the return on investment for students by strengthening the connection between education and jobs.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest.
Well, given that those same students are facing historic unemployment levels due to the pandemic, making it much more difficult for them to pay this massive increase in tuition. And given that the higher tuition, less employment opportunities, higher debt means that over 33% of Alberta's students are considering leaving this province to find training elsewhere. It's the responsibility of this government to find ways to retain and attract the best and brightest minds to support Alberta's economic recovery. Minister, will you please commit to making education more affordable to help Alberta students get through this unprecedented?
The Honourable, the Minister of Children's Services.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Alberta's average degree program tuition is lower than the national average. The average undergraduate degree program tuition in Alberta, Mr. Speaker, is $6,098 in 2020-2021. The national average being $6,580, Mr. Speaker. The average international undergrad tuition in Alberta is $27,404. National average, Mr. Speaker, $7,304. Average international graduate tuition, Mr. Speaker, here in Alberta, $14,683. National average, $19,252.
The Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, given that Alberta students face the highest debt rates in the entire country, and given that this minister and this government is paving over the fact that Alberta students are being literally left out in the cold, unable to go to school because they can't afford it, Minister, will you release, and this is important, the Campus Alberta grant list today so that Albertans can see just how deeply you have cut our 26 universities, polytechnics, and colleges. You didn't release it last year. It will come out sooner or later. You might as well give it to Albertans right now.
The Honourable Minister of Children's Services.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite knows that I can't speak to the budget before it is presented in about half an hour here in the House, but I will remind the members opposite that our undergraduate tuition degree programs are about $250 below the national average. But Mr. Speaker, what's really exciting, here in Alberta, the Minister of Advanced Education is working on Alberta 2030, building skills for jobs. This plan will build a common vision and direction for our higher education system. It will make sure students have the knowledge and skills they need to succeed in whatever career path they choose, whether in the arts, skilled trades, or STEM.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The economic uncertainty of the past year has revealed just how much we all rely on every level of the supply chain. I am especially grateful for the work of the Alberta farmers and ranchers. COVID-19 outbreaks throughout the pandemic have increased the amount producers need to pay for feeding their livestock. These uncertainties make it difficult for producers to know their financial future. In response, the federal government has changed the formula for agri-stability to provide farmers additional financial security for the next 2 years. To the Minister, can you explain to Alberta farmers and ranchers why you haven't signed on to this deal?
The Honourable, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member is pointing out to a change that the federal government has made, and I guess I don't know the finer details, but I am sure that the Minister of Agriculture will have more to say about this down the way.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given it's a partnership between the provinces and the federal government, and given that grain is now selling at record high prices, and that producers who need to extend the time they feed have more difficulty in profit, and the variability of the industry requires stability. And given agri-stability is a business risk management program that can provide that assurance, and given this program is a shared cost with the federal government, and Alberta should take advantage of the opportunity to ensure federal dollars are being leveraged to help Alberta farmers and ranchers. Again, to the Minister, I've spoken to so many farmers and ranchers who want this deal. Why aren't you listening to them?
The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta's government is currently considering the proposal by the federal government while also pursuing larger transformational change to better support Alberta's farmers and ranchers, Mr. Speaker. I can assure you, I know your constituents would agree, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to standing up for the agriculture industry in the province, Mr. Speaker, this government's behind them 100%, Mr. Speaker, and still has not forgotten that honourable member's approach to managing the agriculture industry when she brought in things like Bill 6 trying to shut down the family farm, Mr. Speaker. Farmers can rest assured we'll continue to stand with them here in the Alberta government, Mr. Speaker, and make sure we get the best deal possible for our province.
The honourable member.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, but the deadline to sign on to the agri-stability is already passed. And given it is clear the minister has a different business risk management model than agri-stability, and given the current federal proposal is only set for 2 years, so even if this deal was signed, the minister could still consult and design a program for the future. And given if there's nothing in this budget to provide stability for farmers, then this minister will have a lot of explaining to do. And given these farmers and ranchers' work is critical to our economic future, to the minister, why not stand up, do the right thing for Alberta farmers and ranchers, and sign on to the agri-stability program?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is wrong yet again. In fact, the federal government is still waiting for a response not only from Alberta but from Saskatchewan and Manitoba. All three provinces have forwarded concerns. As I said, the Minister of Agriculture is in conversations with the federal government. We'll ensure that we get the best deal possible for our farming and ranching communities, Mr. Speaker. I understand that the honourable member has a history inside this chamber of not standing with the agriculture community, Mr. Speaker, but rest assured this government will continue to stand side by side with farmers and ranchers. We'll stand side by side with them against the NDP's attack on them, Mr. Speaker, and we'll continue to make sure they get the best deal with the federal government.
The order. The honourable member for Drayton Valley Devon has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. COVID-19 is still causing an issue for normal operations and our day-to-day lives. One of the groups that have been hit hardest by restrictions is young people who rely on school and other activities for social interaction. Ensuring their safety is a priority, and balance is not easy to find. Students have been back in school for more than a month now after the break that started in December due to high COVID numbers. And to the Minister of Education, can you please update us on the current COVID numbers in schools and the effect on operations?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question. I'm sure everyone here will be happy to hear that less than 1% of students and staff have active cases of COVID-19. As Dr. Hinshaw has said, we continue to see the number of new cases in school-aged Albertans declining, and we are working really, really hard to keep it that way. We will continue to follow the advice of our Chief Medical Officer of Health and her team, and we are ready to make changes to the school reentry plan if it's needed. And we just really, really value her solid advice, and we will continue to make student safety a priority.
The Honourable Member for Drayton Valley Devon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Given that vaccine rollout is a key part of being able to get back to normal operations of everything from business to schools, and given that the Trudeau government has completely mismanaged the procurement and the rollout of vaccines in Canada, and given that teachers are vital to the learning of future generations and are asked to constantly be exposed to dozens of children at a time, to the Minister of Health, what priority level are teachers currently at for vaccines in Alberta, and when can they expect them based on current procurement numbers?
The Honourable the Minister of Health has risen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we recognize that many Albertans would benefit from receiving the vaccine, and we want to offer it to them as soon as possible. There is limited supply, though, still, as the member points out, and so we continue to target Albertans who are the most at risk of severe outcomes. And we've successfully vaccinated, first province to do so, all residents in continuing care. We're currently vaccinating community seniors over the age of 75. Currently, teachers aren't allocated for phase 1 or 2, but some teachers who meet the criteria set out in phase 2 will get the vaccine, and that includes any teacher will be eligible for, thank you.
The Honourable Member for Drayton Valley Devon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Given that we supported schools with additional money and resources for COVID response over the past year, and given that there are major delays in procurement of vaccines that are being depended on for normal operations, and given that there are several variants of the virus that are beginning to appear in Alberta that may cause further issues if they spread further, to the Minister of Education, are we prepared to further support schools and education financially regarding COVID for this year, or until vaccines have been sufficiently administered?
The Honourable the Minister of Education has risen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The safety and well-being of our students and staff continues to be our #1 priority, and we will continue to support them financially. Alberta's government has made substantive investments in school divisions, with $120 million in increased operational funding, $250 million in accelerated capital maintenance funding, of which HVAC and ventilation upgrades were part of it. At the end of the 2019-2020 school year, school boards reported a total $384 million in operating reserves, which is an increase of $21 million despite this unprecedented year. School authorities have had access to about $1 billion in additional funding. 3/4 of this was directly funded by Alberta taxpayers. We're proud of that.
Honourable members, that concludes oral question period, but prior to anyone moving, I would beg the indulgence of the Assembly to make a brief statement. It has been said that those who choose public service deserve our thanks because the system only works when thoughtful and principled people participate. I would like to take a moment to recognize the dedicated service of one of our table officers, Stephanie Leblanc. Stephanie joined our team at the Legislative Assembly office in 2008 as a legal research officer, and within a few years she was serving as this Assembly at the table where she has consistently provided trusted advice over the years. Today is Stephanie's last day in this chamber, at least for now. As she shifts her focus to her young family, I know that, now I do know, and I have to warn you members, that Stephanie likes to add a little bit of excitement on her last days of things. It wasn't too long ago that she was in the office on her last day before a maternity leave when her first daughter decided it was time to enter the world, giving a whole new meaning to not only a family-friendly workplace, but also a work-life balance. Now, I say that this is Stephanie's last day for now because typically, if you talk to any staff about her leaving, their first response is, well, maybe she'll come back someday. And I certainly share that hope. It's no wonder people think so highly of Stephanie. Here's just what a few things that people had to say. Stephanie is one of the most upstanding professionals that I know, whose sunny disposition always turns a cloudy, dark COVID day into a more bearable one. But more importantly, she is an amazing human who we all have had the pleasure to work with. In my interactions with her, I could tell you that she is a very intelligent, compassionate, and capable person. And when she talks about her family, I can tell you that they mean the world to her. She's my go-to person for anything, and mostly everything, as she always knows the answer to my questions, or at least where I can find the information. Stephanie, you have certainly made a lasting impression on all of us and have served the Assembly with admirable dedication and professionalism. On behalf of all members of the Assembly, I want to wish you well, and who knows, maybe you will come back someday. But in the meantime, we wish you the very best and hope that our paths cross again. Honourable members, please thank Stephanie Leblanc. Honourable members, in 30 seconds or less, we will return to member statements. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest has a statement.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta is home to a rich landscape of diverse colleges, universities, and polytechnics. We have a world-renowned post-secondary system, and the New Democratic official opposition is here to fight to keep it that way. Cuts to post-secondary education in Alberta from this government has been putting our institutions at risk and driving students out of our province. This government's cuts decimated our schools even before the COVID pandemic began. Now, with so many struggling, the government continues to gamble with our post-secondary education and Alberta's future. One of Alberta's greatest strengths is our post-secondary sector. Our schools draw students and faculty from around the world, a system that provides a world-class education and enriches our society with job opportunities and shaping individuals to build our communities and to build our economy. We don't agree with this government's assessment that our institutions of higher learning are just a line item on a budget with limited value. Spending resources on post-secondary is an investment that will pay dividends exponentially for years to come. Alberta is a home to many quality post-secondary institutions in every corner of our province, and we know that our future depends on increasing access to these institutions and economic diversification that post-secondary helps to nurture. We must grow and sustain those assets to attract more talent to Alberta to learn and to live in every part of our province. We must work on new and innovative ideas on how to leverage our post-secondary assets and to grow the talent pool here within Alberta, not to slash and freeze out the future for Alberta students like this government seems to be trying to do.
The Honourable Member for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, it is my duty as a member of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta to represent my constituents in Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville. I've had many concerns that the distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine is moving too slowly. With an aging population in my riding, many are worried about the delay in receiving their vaccine. In fact, I've heard many of the same concerns all over the province. But, Mr. Speaker, there is a vaccine shortage across the whole country, and this is due to the failure of the federal government procuring enough vaccines for distribution to our most vulnerable population. That is why I wrote the Federal Minister of Public Services and Procurement on February the 12th. I voiced my constituents' concerns that the federal government needs to step up and fight for more vaccines for all Canadians. When I sent the letter, Canada was 38 in the world for vaccine distribution per 100 people. There is no excuse that Canada, which is a member of the G7, is so low in procurement of the vaccine. After many weeks of waiting for the vaccine, it is good news that this week all of Canada has finally received 640,000 doses. With these new doses and our provincial vaccine distribution plan in place, we're able to distribute vaccines to the most vulnerable. Starting on February 24th, we are in Phase 1B, which vaccinates Albertans 75 years and older. With continued procurement of the vaccines, we will be able to continue with our provincial vaccination plan. This means that everyone who wants a vaccine will receive it this year. But we still need the vaccines to be procured by the federal government. The recent doses are great news, but there still is a lot of work needed to be done, and many more vaccines needed to be distributed across Canada. My hope is that we continue to receive the necessary doses from the vaccine from the federal government. If not, I will continue to be the voice for my constituents that need them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The COVID pandemic has put a tremendous amount of strain and stress upon Albertans that work in many critical businesses and sectors. This includes nurses, healthcare aides, paramedics, school bus drivers, those working in food banks, women's shelters, grocery stores, and so many others. These Albertans have put themselves in the path of COVID day after day in order to ensure that the rest of us have safe access to the goods and services that we need to function as normally as possible. It is high time that these workers receive some tangible recognition for their services and their support. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to see the government move forward with the Critical Worker Benefit. The Critical Worker Benefit is a joint federal-provincial program that will see $465 million going to approximately 380,000 Alberta public and private sector workers in the form of a one-time $1,200 payment. Workers in healthcare, social services, education, as well as some parts of the private sector defined as critical services, such as grocery and pharmacy retail, food processing, transportation, private health clinics, and many others, will receive a one-time payment to recognize their hard work. and continued dedication to serve and support Albertans throughout the pandemic. The critical worker benefit directly shows our government's commitment in ensuring critical workers in both the private and public sector are taken care of and appreciated during these difficult times. Our government is dedicated to protecting the lives and livelihoods of all Albertans, and this benefit is just one more step in that direction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lacombe-Panoke has a statement to make.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Controlling greenhouse gas emissions, or GHGs, produced by major industrial emitters is fundamental to addressing climate change and enhancing Alberta's economy. There are many options on how to best tackle this issue. I, like many Albertans, don't think new taxes and fines that only make everyday life more expensive are the correct path. When it's minus 35 degrees, taxes shouldn't drive Albertans to have to ask themselves if they can afford to heat their homes. I believe that the entrepreneurial spirit that runs deep inside the heart of Alberta will be our most effective path to resolving this issue. Entrepreneurs like Zero Emission Energy Technology, or ZEET Incorporated in my riding, are blazing the tech trail that may lead us to a more sustainable future. Their proprietary technology, placed in an industrial natural gas facility, can help capture some of the 6 to 10 million BTUs of fugitive lost energy escaping every hour from a compressor engine's exhaust. Each ZEET unit can effectively capture the annual equivalent of removing 518 cars from the road while reducing energy costs. Fabrication of these units in Black Falls will benefit their struggling industrial sector. Innovation in value-added sectors like this will be crucial to Alberta's economic recovery from the triple hit we've received in the past years. I am proud that our government is acting to return the Alberta advantage. Measures like expediting the job creation tax cut, lowering the corporate tax rate from 12 to 8%, make Alberta one of the most attractive jurisdictions in North America for investment. Changes in policy like the Technology Innovation and Emissions Reduction Regulation also take a balanced approach as we move out of these tough economic times. Building on the record level of new capital investment in Alberta's tech sector in 2020, our province is in a unique position to find new and innovative ways to address greenhouse gas emissions while creating jobs and protecting lives and livelihoods for all Albertans. Thank you.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Presenting petitions, notices of motions, introduction of bills, tabling returns and reports.
The Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to table the appropriate amount of copies of the 2021-22 main estimate schedule for the second session of the 30th Legislature.
Are there other tablings? Seeing none.
Tablings to the clerk, deferred divisions.
Honourable members, it's time for orders of the day, orders du jour.
Under government motions, motion number 63, Honourable Mr. Nixon.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to move Government Motion 63, which is on the order paper in my name. Be it resolved that the membership of the Assembly's committees be replaced as follows. A, on Standing Committee on the Alberta Heritage Saving Trust Fund, that Mr. Roswell replace Mr. Getson, and Mr. Roswell replace Mr. Getson as Deputy Chair. That Ms. Isaac replace Ms. Glasgow, and Mr. Yassine replace Mr. Turton. B, on the Standing Committee on Legislative Offices, that Ms. Rosen replace Mr. Nixon, Mr. Smith replace Mr. Van Dyken, and Mr. Azine replace Mr. Walker. C, on the Standing Committees on Private Bills and Private Members' Public Bills, that Mr. Dang replace Ms. Ganley, Mr. Amory replace Mr. Horner, Mr. Rutherford replace Mr. Neudorf, and Mr. Getson replace Mr. Nixon. D, on the Standing Committee on Privileges and Elections, Standing Orders and Printing, that Mr. Barnes replace Ms. Isaac, Ms. Ganley replace Ms. Pancioloni, and Mr. Godfrey replace Mr. Yao. And E, on Standing Committee on Public Accounts, that Mr. Guthrie replace Mr. Godfrey as Deputy Chair, Mr. Walker replace Mr. Godfrey, Ms. Armstrong-Hominick replace Mr. Barnes, Ms. Pancioloni replace Mr. Dack, Mr. Neudorf replace Mr. Reid, and Ms. Lovely replace Ms. Rosen, Mr. Singh replace Mr. Stefan, and Mr. Torton replace Mr. Tor. F, on the Special Standing Committee on Member Services, that Mr. Segerson replace Mr. Walker. And G, on the Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Future, that Ms. Sweet replace Mr. Dang, Mr. Van Dyken replace Mr. Horner, Mr. Roswell replace Mr. Stefan, and Mr. Walker replace Mr. Tor. H, on the Standing Committee on Families and Communities, that Ms. Lovely replace Mr. Guthrie, Mr. Godfrey replace Mr. Nixon, and Mr. Smith replace Mr. Yao. And I, on the Standing Committee on Resource Stewardship, that Mr. Guthrie replace Ms. Furr, Ms. Isaac replace Mr. Wren, and Mr. Torton replace Mr. Smith. Mr. Speaker, the motion is self-explanatory, and as you can tell, I am clearly not going to be the table officer's replacement.
Honourable members, according to Standing Order 18-1H, this is a debatable motion. Does anyone have any additional comments, questions, or debate to be added to the motion? Seeing none, I am prepared to call the question. Honourable members, as on the proposed motion by the Government House Leader, Government Motion number 63, all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. My opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Government Motion 64. Honourable Mr. Nixon.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do rise to move Government Motion 64. A, be it resolved that temporary amendments be made to the standing orders of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta effective February 10th, 2021 as follows. Standing Order 3 is amended, I, in Suborder 4 by striking out 8 or 9 and substituting 8, 9, or 10, and 2 by adding the following after Suborder 9. 10, subject to Suborder 12, the Speaker may extend a period of adjournment in accordance with Suborder 11 if the Speaker is satisfied that either of the following applies. A, the Assembly should not meet on that specific date or time due to an emergency event, or B, it is in the public's interest for the period of adjournment to be extended. 11, the Speaker may extend an adjournment by, after consulting with the Government House Leader and the Official Opposition House Leader, A, specifying the date and time until which the adjournment is extended, and B, provide notice of that date and time when the Assembly shall next meet to transact its business as if it has been duly adjourned to that date and time. 12, a period of adjournment extending under Suborder 11 may be superseded by subsequent notification from the Government under Suborder 8 that the Assembly must meet. B, Standing Order 5 is amended, I, in Suborder 1 by striking out 20 members and substituting 12 members, and 2 by striking out Suborder 2 and substituting the following. 2, if during a sitting of the Assembly a question of quorum arises, the Speaker shall, on determining that a quorum is lacking, A, order the bells to ring for no longer than 15 minutes, and B, conduct a count of the members present immediately after the bells are rung, and C, if quorum is still lacking on conclusion of the count, declare recess or adjourn the Assembly until the next sitting day. And B, be it further resolved that the temporary amendments in this motion come into force on passage and expire at 11:59 p.m. on Friday, June 4th, I should say, Mr. Speaker, 2021. Again, motion self-explanatory, and I believe has the support of the opposition.
Honourable members, the Government Motion 64 is debatable according to Standing Order 18. Is there anyone else that would like to add to the debate this afternoon with respect to the motion before the Assembly? Seeing none, I am prepared to call the question. Having heard the motion as proposed by the Honourable Government House Leader, Government Motion number 64, all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. My opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Motion number 66, Honourable Mr. Nixon.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to move Government Motion 66, which is on the order paper in my name, and reads as follows, Mr. Speaker. Be it resolved that Bill 211, the Municipal Government Firearms Amendment Act 2020, be moved to government bills in order on the order paper, Mr. Speaker. This is a motion to move the Honourable Member from Brooks Medicine Hat's private member's bill that is currently working its way through the legislative process, Mr. Speaker, that was designed to stand up against the federal government's clear violation of our jurisdiction as a province in an attempt to be able to use municipalities to attack law-abiding firearm owners inside our province, Mr. Speaker. This is something that this government will not tolerate, Mr. Speaker. I know you're aware of a motion that was passed unanimously in this Assembly, moved by myself, to make it clear that we would stand up for law-abiding gun owners inside this province if the federal government was to continue with their attack on them. It appears that the federal government, unfortunately, is going to do that. As the Honourable Member has a bill that is already ready to go to be able to stand up to the federal government, Mr. Speaker, the government's going to take the steps of making it a government bill and get it through the chamber as fast as possible.
Honourable members, Government Motion 66 is a debatable motion pursuant to Standing Order 18-1A. Is there anyone wishing to join in the debate this afternoon? Seeing none, I am prepared to call the question. Having heard the motion as proposed by the Honourable Government House Leader, Government Motion 66, all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered. Honourable members, this afternoon, as you are well aware, will be the budget address. In order to allow adequate time to prepare for the budget address by the Honourable, the President of Treasury Board and the Minister of Finance, the House is recessed until 3:15.